If you buy bread the way most people buy bread, by habit, by color, by texture, by whatever name sounds the most comforting, then this is one of the most misleading aisles in the entire grocery store. Because bread has learned how to borrow trust. It borrows trust from words like honey, whole grain, farmhouse, artisano, potato, keto, thick-sliced, seeded, baked soft, family favorite. It borrows trust from warm colors on the bag, from brown packaging, from flour-dusted photos, from the look of something rustic, even when the formula underneath is still doing very industrial things. And that is why this matters. People do not usually pick a bad loaf because they want junk. They pick it because they think they are making the slightly smarter choice, the slightly cleaner choice, the loaf that feels one step more adult, one step more wholesome, one step more worth the money. That is the trap. This is not about pretending every additive is poison or every soft loaf is a crisis. It is about the gap between the image being sold and the bread actually being sold. In this category, that gap can get huge. Some loaves are basically upfront about being fluffy, sweet, refined white bread. Others wear a premium costume, a health costume, or a craft costume while still leaning on the same old softness-first logic underneath. So this countdown is about the brands where that trust gap is biggest, the loaves I would avoid if the goal is cleaner ingredient logic, better transparency, and fewer highly engineered compromises. And then we will end with 3 breads that come much closer to what people think they are buying in the first place. Bread that is genuinely safer by packaged bread standards because the label has less theater and more honesty. At number 10, Nature's Own Honey Wheat. This is exactly how the aisle starts playing games with people. Honey wheat sounds simple, slightly better, slightly more old school. It sounds like the loaf you grab when you are trying to move away from basic white bread without shocking the household. But then you look closer. On this bread, wheat flour comes before whole wheat flour. That matters, because it tells you the product is still anchored more heavily in refined flour than the front of bag feeling suggests. Yes, there is honey. Yes, there is some whole wheat. But there is also sugar, wheat gluten, wheat bran, and oil helping deliver that soft, sweet, very mainstream sandwich bread texture. So the issue here is not that the loaf is uniquely terrible. The issue is that it gets too much credit for the mood it creates. A lot of people buy honey wheat as if they have already left the white bread category behind, when in reality, they have often just bought a friendlier version of it. Darker tone, softer health halo, same basic strategy. And once you notice that, you start seeing how much of this aisle is built on emotional wording more than ingredient clarity. At number 9, Arnold 100% Whole Wheat. Now this one is more respectable than what we just covered. That needs to be said. Whole wheat flour leads. There are additional grain components. It is a real step up from a conventional white loaf. But this countdown is not just about whether a bread is better than the worst thing near it. It is about whether the loaf earns the confidence people place in it. Arnold's 100% whole wheat still lives in that middle ground where the image is stronger than the purity. Sugar is still there. Soybean oil is still there. Wheat gluten is helping shape texture. Natural flavor shows up. In other words, this is still a mass appeal product trying to feel hearty and wholesome while staying soft, sweet, and easy enough for the broadest possible customer base. And that middle ground is where many shoppers stall out. They graduate from obviously fluffy white bread into a darker loaf and stop asking questions. Brown color becomes proof. Whole wheat becomes a finish line. But categories like this make money when the customer quits one step too early. Better is not always clean. More respectable is not always more honest. Sometimes the darker loaf is a real improvement. Sometimes it is just a more sophisticated compromise. At number 8, Martin's Potato Bread. This one sells memory as much as bread. Potato bread has a built-in emotional advantage because the name feels old-fashioned and homier than standard sandwich bread. You picture Sunday sandwiches, golden slices, something with a little more body, something made from a more substantial idea than plain enriched white bread. But when you look at what supports that signature Martin's experience, you are still looking at a loaf built around enriched wheat flour, with sugar, oil, milk components, reconstituted potatoes, and color, helping create the softness and look people recognize instantly. And that is what makes this brand so effective. The texture is incredible if your goal is pure comfort. It compresses like a cushion. It springs back. It toasts beautifully. It makes burgers and deli sandwiches feel more indulgent than they probably deserve to feel. But none of that automatically makes it a cleaner or more trustworthy bread. The word potato sounds like substance. In practice, it often works more like branding architecture. A different identity wrapped around the same industrial bread priorities: softness, sweetness, consistency, shelf life, familiarity. If you buy it as a treat, fine. If you buy it because the name makes it sound like a smarter staple, that is where the misunderstanding begins. At number 7, Pepperidge Farm Farmhouse Hearty White. This loaf is one of the best examples of how premium language can be even more persuasive than health language. Pepperidge Farm does not have to scream wellness to get your trust. It uses terms like farmhouse and hearty, and the packaging does the rest. Thick slices, rustic styling, a bakery-adjacent feel. It looks like the kind of bread that rose above bargain shelf sandwich bread a long time ago. Then you get to the actual formula, and you are right back in familiar territory. Enriched wheat flour, water, sugar, yeast, and the usual support system that helps a mass-produced loaf behave like a handmade one. That is the trick here. It does not need to tell you it is healthy. It only needs to make you feel like it is more real. More substantial, less industrial. But a loaf can wear a farmhouse costume and still be playing the same softness game as everything else around it. If the crumb is still ultra-even, the sweetness still noticeable, the durability still suspiciously polished, then the image and the ingredient logic are not telling the same story. This is not craft bread. It is industrial bread with better art direction. And before we get into the top 6, pause on the pattern for a second, because the pattern matters more than any one brand. None of these breads landed here because one ingredient alone decides the whole verdict. They landed here because the front of the bag is doing a lot of emotional labor. It is creating a stronger impression of simplicity, tradition, substance, or health than the back of the bag can really defend. That is the thing to watch. Not just what the bread contains, but how hard the branding is asking you to relax before you read it. At number 6, Sara Lee Artisano Original. This brand basically turned white bread into a luxury performance. And to be fair, it is an effective performance. The shape is more elegant. The slices are thicker. The crumb is absurdly soft. The whole product is positioned like something bakery-inspired, something elevated, something a grown-up shopper graduates into after leaving ordinary sandwich bread behind. But once you strip away the styling, the logic is still deeply conventional. Enriched wheat flour, water, sugar, yeast, vegetable oil, and the familiar formula choices that create that cloud-soft, hyper-consistent texture. This matters because people do not buy Artisano the way they buy cheap bread. They buy it as an upgrade. A better grilled cheese bread, a better burger bread, a better bread for company. The bag practically tells you that you have moved up a tier, but if the upgrade is mostly shape, branding, and mouthfeel, while the ingredient structure remains firmly refined and engineered, then the price is rising faster than the integrity. You are not really escaping the system. You are buying a prettier version of it. At number 5, King's Hawaiian Original Sweet Bread and Rolls. These are genuinely delicious, and that is exactly why people stop classifying them correctly. King's Hawaiian is so familiar now that many shoppers treat it like ordinary bread infrastructure. It shows up at barbecues, weeknight dinners, school functions, party platters, holiday tables. It gets used for sliders, sandwiches, breakfast, dinner, and sometimes all three in the same house. But this is not a neutral staple loaf. This is a sweet, pleasure-first bread product with enriched flour and multiple sweetening and enriching elements helping create that glossy, plush, unmistakably craveable bite. And the issue is not that sweet bread exists. The issue is that sweet bread is being mentally downgraded into just bread. Once a product becomes emotionally familiar enough, people stop evaluating what lane it belongs in. King's Hawaiian lives in the same visual and social space as dinner rolls and sandwich bread, but the experience is much closer to a soft indulgence product. It is springy, rich, and sweet enough that the bread itself is doing flavor work before you put anything on it. If you treat it like an occasional indulgence, fine. If you treat it like a normal daily default because it feels friendly and family approved, you are giving the brand a free pass it has not earned. At number 4, Lewis Bake Shop Better Way Keto Bread. This one represents a newer style of bread confusion, and in some ways it is more revealing than the old-school brands. Keto bread arrives wearing such a strong health halo that people stop using normal food-reading instincts. They see low carbs, they see avocado oil, they see keto language, and assume that cleaner is part of the deal. But low-carb bread often proves something else entirely. When a product is trying to imitate bread while dodging the usual starch structure of bread, the ingredient list can become a serious engineering project. Resistant wheat starch, wheat protein, allulose, fibers, preservatives, emulsifier-type helpers, gums, and stabilizing pieces start doing the work that simple grain formulas no longer can. That does not mean nobody should ever buy it. It means buyers need to stop confusing goal-specific with simple. A loaf can serve a macro target and still be heavily formulated. A loaf can fit a diet framework and still be far removed from what most people imagine when they hear the word bread. So if you are buying keto bread because it sounds automatically safer than conventional bread, slow down. Sometimes what you are really buying is a more technical simulation, with better wellness branding. Now this is where the list gets more uncomfortable, because the next 3 brands are the ones people often defend the hardest. At number 3, Dave's Killer Bread 21 Whole Grains and Seeds. Let's be fair first. Dave's is better than a lot of the aisle. The organic positioning is real. The whole grain and seed profile is real. It does not belong in the same conversation as the fluffiest white breads pretending to be premium. But this video is not ranking the worst bread ever made. It is identifying the brands I would avoid if the standard is truly clean, truly straightforward, and less dependent on image inflation. And Dave's still sits in an interesting gray zone. It includes organic cane sugar. It is still built to be sweet enough, soft enough, and craveable enough to win over mainstream shoppers. The grains and seeds help deliver real substance, but they also help build a very strong health identity that can outrun the nuance. That is the part people miss. Dave's is often treated like the aisle has already been solved, like the search is over. Best bread found. But better than average and genuinely simple are not the same thing. If your question is this more defensible than refined white bread dressed up in farm language? Absolutely. If your question is this one of the cleanest, most honest loaves I can buy? Not necessarily. It may still be a compromise, just a much more attractive one. At number 2, Sunbeam Giant White Bread. Sunbeam represents a style of bread that many Americans grew up treating as normal. And once you revisit it with adult eyes, the formula feels almost like a time capsule. Refined flour at the center, high fructose corn syrup in the mix, oil, conditioners, softeners, and that classic ultra-airy, ultra-tender structure that seems designed to disappear the second you chew it. This is bread with almost no resistance, no grain character, no real sense of structure. It tears instead of slices. It compresses into a doughy little patch under your fingers. It tastes faintly sweet before the peanut butter, before the deli meat, before anything else even enters the picture. And that is why it ranks this high. Because it shows the category in one of its purest industrial forms. No craft costume, no wellness costume, just softness, sweetness, shelf performance, and familiarity. In a strange way, that makes it more honest than some of the premium loaves further down the list. But honesty alone does not rescue the product. Sunbeam still represents one of the weakest standards in the aisle. The idea that bread's highest achievement is to be pillowy, bland, and impossible to question because it feels nostalgic. And number 1 is Wonder Classic White Bread. Not because it is the most dramatic loaf on the shelf, because it is the blueprint that trained generations of shoppers how to think about bread in the first place. Wonder taught people that bread should be feather-light, bright, sweet, uniformly soft, and almost frictionless to eat. The classic formula revolves around enriched flour, water, sugar, and a lineup of conditioners and emulsifier-style helpers that create that bounce, that symmetry, That strange visual perfection where every slice feels like it came out of a bread laboratory instead of a kitchen. This is the loaf that turned softness into virtue. This is the loaf that helped convince people that whiteness meant purity, that puffiness meant freshness, that more durability meant better quality. And once that expectation was set, the whole category started building around it. Some brands copied it directly. Some brands disguised it with rustic language. Some brands dressed it up with seeds, brown tones, and premium pricing. But the underlying lesson stayed the same. Make it soft, make it sweet, make it easy, and let the bag handle the trust. That is why Wonder takes number 1. It is not just a bread. It is the original consumer misunderstanding that so many other loaves still depend on. Now the relief pivot, because avoiding 10 breads is useless if I do not give you better places to look. The first loaf that comes closest to genuinely safe by packaged bread standards is Food for Life Ezekiel 4:9 sprouted whole grain bread. And I want to be precise about what makes it stand out. Not miracle claims, not magical branding. Ingredient logic. When you read this label, it reads like actual grain construction instead of texture engineering. Organic sprouted wheat, filtered water, organic sprouted barley, organic sprouted millet, malted barley, sprouted lentils, sprouted soybeans, sprouted spelt, yeast, sea salt. That is a radically different label experience from most supermarket bread. The loaf feels denser because it is denser. It chews like grain because grain is really there. It does not have to act handcrafted. It does not have to cosplay health. The formula itself does the explaining. The second genuinely safer option is Alvarado Street Bakery sprouted breads. Now these are not always as stripped down as Ezekiel. Some varieties use honey or molasses. Some are a little more accommodating in texture. But the overall philosophy is still far more trustworthy than what dominates the shelf. Sprouted organic whole wheat berries, filtered water, recognizable grain ingredients, and a formula that feels like it started from food and then became bread, not the other way around. That distinction matters. Honest bread usually looks less glamorous in the bag and more defensible on the label. Alvarado tends to understand that trade-off better than the brands trying to please everyone at once. The third genuinely safer choice is Silver Hills sprouted bread, especially the varieties that keep the formula centered on sprouted grains and seeds rather than softness theater. Again, not perfect, not mystical, not the answer for every single shopper, but compared with the mainstream aisle, this is much closer to the bread people imagine they are buying when they hear words like whole grain and natural. Sprouted grains lead the experience. Seeds and grain components feel like actual structure, not decorative health confetti. The texture is there for a reason. The density is there for a reason. It reads more like a loaf trying to be bread than a loaf trying to imitate comfort food fluff while wearing better language. So what is the real rule after all of this? Do not shop bread by vibes. Do not shop it by brown packaging. Do not shop it by the word honey. Do not shop it by potato nostalgia, farmhouse nostalgia, bakery nostalgia, keto status, seed sprinkles, thick slices, or premium fonts. Shop it by sequence. What is the first ingredient? Is the grain actually whole, or is refined flour still running the show? How early do the sweeteners show up? How much help does the loaf need from oils, conditioners, gums, emulsifiers, preservatives, and texture supports? And most importantly, is the front of the bag trying to make you feel calmer, healthier, or more sophisticated than the ingredient list can honestly justify? That is the whole game. Because most people are not failing in the bread aisle because they are lazy. They are failing because this is one of the most polished trust games in grocery retail. You reach for the loaf that feels slightly more responsible than the last one you bought. Slightly more mature. Slightly more real. And sometimes that instinct is right. But a lot of the time, the brand is not selling you better bread. It is selling you a better story about the same basic formula. And if there is one thing to remember from this list, it is this. The safer loaf usually impresses you less before you eat it and more after you read it. Less theater, more substance, less emotional design, more ingredient honesty. If you think I ranked one of these too high or too low, Drop the exact bread brand in the comments and tell me why. If there is a loaf in your kitchen right now that you trust, put the full name below and let's compare labels. And if you want the next breakdown on tortillas, peanut butter, yogurt, deli meat, bagels, or healthy cereal, say that too. Because the more ordinary the food looks, the more important it is to know what you are actually being sold.